When my father asked me what I did with the $200,000, the room went silent. His voice wasn't angry, it was calm, measured, and that made it worse. I froze. My hand hovered above the glass of water in front of me, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Around the table, everyone had stopped talking. My sister Claire looked down at her plate. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, pretending she didn't hear. But Dad's eyes were locked on mine. "Megan," he said again, slower this time. "What did you do with the money I gave you?" The truth was, I hadn't done anything wrong. Not really. But in a family like mine, right and wrong were never about morals, they were about perception, about power. And at that table, power was something I hadn't had in a very long time. I should have known that night was going to end in disaster. Everything about it felt staged: the expensive wine, the forced laughter, the way Claire had insisted on hosting dinner at her house instead of Dad's. I'd thought she was trying to ease some of the tension that had been building since Mom's surgery, but now I realized she'd been setting a stage. And I was the story. Dad's question wasn't casual. It was a knife disguised as curiosity. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. "Dad," Claire cut in, her voice honeyed and sharp. "Oh, come on, Megan. Don't act like it's a secret. You used it for that business idea, right? The one you said would change your life." I turned toward her. "That's not what happened, and you know it." She smiled sweetly. "Then tell him." The air in the room thickened. I glanced at my father again. His face was expressionless, but his silence said everything. He wasn't asking. He was accusing. The story behind that money wasn't simple, not to me at least. A year earlier, when Mom had been hospitalized, Dad had given each of us $200,000. He called it an advance on inheritance, a way to help us stabilize our lives. Claire used hers to remodel her house. I used mine to pay off debts, invest in my own design studio, and cover Mom's care bills when insurance fell short. I never saw it as a gift, I saw it as a responsibility. But now, watching my sister smirk behind her wine glass, I realized she'd twisted that narrative. "I didn't waste it," I said finally, my voice trembling but firm. "I used it to help Mom when the hospital bills came in. You remember the insurance didn't cover her medication. I also used some to clear the mortgage and invest in my studio. Everything's documented." Claire laughed softly. "Oh, please, Megan. Don't act like you're some kind of saint. We all helped Mom." My father's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. "Is that true?" "Yes," I said. "Every receipt's on record." But I could see it in his face. He didn't believe me. Or worse, he didn't want to. That realization stung more than anything else, because my father had always been my compass, stern but fair, old-fashioned but protective. And in that moment, I saw something break in his gaze, the trust between us. Claire leaned forward. "You know, Dad, I just find it strange. Megan always talks about her business being profitable, but somehow she's always behind on bills." "That's not true," I said. "She even borrowed from Mom last year, didn't she?" Claire's smile widened. "Maybe that's where the money went." "Stop," I whispered. "But she didn't. She never did. She's been using you, Dad. She always has. You give her everything: money, sympathy, chances, and she gives you excuses." I pushed my chair back, my pulse hammering in my ears. "You're lying." She shrugged. "Prove it." I looked around the table at my father, my mother, my sister's husband. No one said a word. That silence was my answer. I left the house without finishing dinner. The night air was cold, and the sky hung heavy with low clouds. I walked to my car in silence, each step echoing against the driveway like the sound of a gavel. By the time I sat behind the wheel, tears had already blurred my vision. It wasn't just the accusation that hurt, it was the fact that they believed her, that he believed her. The next morning, my phone rang. I let it buzz until it stopped. Then it rang again, and again. By the fifth call, I answered. "Megan," my father's voice, calm, low, unyielding. "We need to talk." I wanted to tell him there was nothing left to say. But when it's your father calling, no matter how old you are, a part of you still answers like a child. When I arrived at his office, he didn't even look up from his desk. "Sit down." I sat. He opened a folder thick with papers, receipts, bank statements, transfers. My name highlighted in yellow ink. "Claire brought these to me," he said. "Do you want to explain?" I took the papers in trembling hands. They weren't fake. They were real but twisted. Context stripped away. Numbers pulled from timelines to make it look like I'd funneled money into personal expenses instead of the business. She'd built a narrative out of fragments, and it was devastatingly convincing. "Dad," I said softly, "I can explain all of this. She's manipulating the numbers. He leaned back in his chair. Your sister has her flaws, Megan, but she doesn't lie about money. That sentence landed like a punch to the chest. I wanted to scream that she did lie, that she'd been lying all her life, but the words caught in my throat. Because deep down I realized something cruel. It wasn't about what I could prove. It was about what he wanted to believe. He sighed. You're your mother's daughter, he said finally. Too emotional. Too trusting. I wanted to believe you'd handle responsibility better. Dad, please. Enough. He looked at me not with anger but with disappointment. Whatever you've done, fix it. Because next time I won't. He stood signaling the conversation was over. I walked out of that office, numb. For the first time, I understood what betrayal really felt like. Not when someone lies about you, but when someone you love chooses to believe the lie. That day marked the beginning of something I never expected, the unraveling of a family built on pride, secrets, and selective loyalty. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, they took everything from you, so take something back. For days after that confrontation, I couldn't bring myself to leave the apartment. I lived in a strange kind of silence, not peaceful but hollow. The kind where even the smallest sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a dog, felt too loud. I kept replaying that moment in my father's office, his words echoing in my head like a loop I couldn't escape. Your sister doesn't lie about money. That was when I knew something inside me had shifted forever. It wasn't just disappointment anymore, it was a quiet severing. A thread had snapped, and once it broke, there was no weaving it back together. Claire had always been the golden child, the perfect daughter, the one who made straight A's, married well, and lived in a house with too many windows. I'd always known she envied me for one thing, my independence, but I never thought she'd weaponize that envy. I spent the next week sorting through old files, receipts, and bank statements. Not because I wanted to prove myself to my father anymore, but because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined everything, that I had done things right. Every page I turned, every date I checked, confirmed what I already knew. Claire had deliberately misrepresented the transactions. She'd taken numbers out of sequence merged accounts that weren't even mine, and presented them in a way that looked like I was using family money to fund personal luxuries. The worst part, she knew my father would never verify the details himself. He'd take her word for it, because that's what he always did. It wasn't the first time she'd turned his trust into her weapon. When we were kids, she'd break things, vases, mirrors once, even Dad's watch, and she'd blame me. I used to cry, swear I hadn't done it, but Dad would just say, Megan, your sister doesn't lie. Apologize and let it go. I had spent a lifetime apologizing for things I didn't do. But not this time. This time I wanted her to feel what it was like to be the one exposed. So I started digging deeper. Not out of revenge, not yet, but out of instinct. The kind that kicks in when survival and dignity are on the same line. I went through the charity records, the family business files, and even some of her company's public filings. And that's when I saw it. A series of payments, small, scattered, hidden under consulting fees in a company she and her husband owned jointly. But those payments led somewhere familiar, a private investment account under Dad's name, one that had mysteriously lost money over the past year. I didn't need to be an accountant to piece it together. Claire had been quietly moving Dad's funds to cover a bad investment her husband had made, then burying the paper trail beneath my name when things started to unravel. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, heart pounding. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was grief. Because now I understood the full truth. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd betrayed him too. That night I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft, almost cautious. Megan. Hi, Mom. A pause. It's been a while. I know. There was another silence, the kind that fills years instead of seconds. Then she sighed. He told me about the money. Of course he did, I said. Did he tell you about the files Claire gave him? Yes, he showed me. He seemed convinced. And you. I've lived long enough to know your sister doesn't always play fair, she said quietly. But you know how your father is. Once he's made up his mind, he won't change it, I finished for her. Exactly. I closed my eyes. Mom, there's something you need to see. I found proof that she's been using his accounts to cover her husband's losses. Silence. Then you're sure? I'm sure. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. Megan, if you show him that, it'll destroy him. I swallowed. She already did. For the next few days, I gathered everything, the receipts, the transfers, the account screenshots. I wasn't going to confront her right away. I needed to be precise, patient, because the only thing worse than being falsely accused was trying to defend yourself with half-truths. The opportunity came sooner than expected. It was my mother's birthday, and Claire had planned a family dinner at the same restaurant where the last confrontation happened. Part of me wanted to refuse the invitation, but another part, the part that had been humiliated in front of them all, knew I had to go. Not for revenge, but for truth. When I arrived, Claire was already there, glowing as always. She greeted me with a smile too perfect to be real. "Megan, I wasn't sure you'd show up." "Neither was I said calmly. Dad sat at the head of the table, his expression neutral. Mom looked nervous. Claire's husband scrolled on his phone, uninterested. Dinner started like nothing had ever happened. Forced laughter, polite conversation, meaningless chatter. But beneath the surface, everything vibrated with tension. When dessert came, I waited for the lull in conversation. Then I said, "Dad, there's something I need to clear up. About the money." His fork froze midair. Claire's smile stiffened. "Megan, not tonight," my mother whispered. "No, Mom," I said softly. "It has to be tonight." I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table thick like the one he'd shown me weeks ago. Claire tried to keep her tone light. "Really, Megan, you're still on this?" "Yes," I said, "because I finally have the truth." I opened the folder and slid the first page toward Dad. "You see this account? It's under your name, the same one that's been losing money since last year. Claire's been moving funds from her company into it to cover her husband's failed investments, and when the numbers didn't match, she used my transactions as camouflage." Claire's eyes widened. "That's ridiculous." "It's all here," I interrupted. "Every date, every transfer, every signature." Dad's face drained of color. He took the papers, flipping through them in silence. The sound of pages turning was the only thing that broke the air. Finally, he looked up, not at me but at her. "Is this true?" Claire laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that trembled at the edges. "Dad, you can't seriously believe she—" He slammed his hand on the table. "Answer me!" The restaurant fell silent. A few heads turned. For the first time in my life, I saw my sister speechless. Her confidence shattered. It was temporary," she stammered. "We were going to replace it. You wouldn't have even noticed if—" But the rest of her sentence died when Dad stood up. His expression was a mixture of rage and heartbreak, two things that should never share the same space. "Get out," he said quietly. Claire blinked. "What?" I said, "Get out." Her lips parted as if to protest, but then she saw the look in his eyes and she knew. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling. Her husband followed, face pale. They left without another word. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel relieved, just empty. My father sank back into his chair, staring at the papers as if they were ashes. "I raised her better than this," he whispered. I looked at him, the man who doubted me, judged me, dismissed me, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. "Maybe you did," I said softly. "But she chose who she became." He nodded, eyes glassy. "And you chose truth." That night when I got home, I sat by the window and watched the city lights blur into 1,000 colors. For years I'd chased approval, his, hers, everyone's. But that night, for the first time, I realized I didn't need it anymore. Because the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs time. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. I let it ring twice before answering. It was Dad. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, not weak, but weathered. "Megan," he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to see you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to make him feel even briefly the distance he'd made me live with for years. But something inside me, maybe the part that still remembered being his little girl, said yes. When I arrived at the house, the air felt heavy. Mom greeted me with red eyes, her face pale. "He hasn't slept," she whispered. "He just keeps reading those papers." I walked into his study. The same folder I'd given him last night was open on his desk. He looked up slowly. The man I saw in front of me wasn't the father who had scolded me, or the businessman who demanded perfection. He looked older, smaller somehow, as if the truth had taken something from him he could never get back. "Megan," he said softly, "sit down." I sat. He pushed a piece of paper across the desk toward me. "Your sister called this morning. She and her husband are leaving the city." I nodded. "Good." He sighed. "I tried to talk to her, but she just kept saying I humiliated her, that you turned me against her." A bitter smile touched my lips. "That sounds like her." He looked at me, his eyes tired. I believed her over you for too long. I told myself it was because she was reliable, practical. But really it was because she knew how to say what I wanted to hear. There was something raw in his tone, not just guilt, but recognition. The kind that comes too late. I've spent my life building things, he said quietly. Companies, wealth, legacies. But I never learned how to build trust. I just assumed it would stay standing on its own. I looked at him, unsure what to say. He rubbed his temples and exhaled deeply. You were right about everything. I checked the accounts myself. She drained nearly 200,000 before covering the gaps with those fake transfers. I swallowed hard. You didn't have to. I did, he interrupted. Because I needed to face what I refused to see. I let her use my pride against me. And I let you carry the shame that belonged to her. Something inside me, something hard and cold, cracked open. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I just looked at him, at the man who had once been unshakable, now sitting in front of me, humbled by his own blindness. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not for the money, for not knowing who you were all along. I wanted to say I forgive you, but forgiveness wasn't something you could force. It had to arrive on its own, quietly, like dawn. So instead I said, thank you for believing me now. He nodded, his eyes glistening. You always deserved that much. Weeks passed, and the family fell silent. Claire didn't call. She didn't write. The only updates I got were whispers from my mother that they'd sold the house, that her husband had lost his position, that she'd been seen at the bank closing joint accounts. It wasn't joy I felt when I heard those things. It was sorrow. Because for all her cruelty, she was still my sister, the girl I used to share a room with, who used to braid my hair and tell me secrets under the blanket when we were kids. Somewhere along the line, that girl had disappeared, swallowed by greed and competition. And maybe in some small way, I had disappeared too. I'd spent so much of my life defining myself through their approval, proving I wasn't the failure they thought I was, that I was capable, responsible, worthy. But now that I finally had their silence, I didn't know what to do with it. The first weekend after it all ended, I drove to the coast. It was something I hadn't done in years. The ocean was calm that morning, the horizon soft and gold. I sat on the sand listening to the waves roll in one after another, relentless but soothing. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the confrontation. And it struck me that the real revenge hadn't been exposing my sister or reclaiming my father's trust. The real revenge was peace. Peace was the one thing she could never fake, never buy, never manipulate. I stayed there until the sun began to set, the sky fading from blue to amber. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, not happy exactly, but unburdened. When I got home that evening, there was a letter waiting for me in the mailbox. No return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. It was from Claire. My hands trembled as I opened it. Megan, I don't know what you want me to say. I messed up. I was desperate and I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just couldn't stand watching you win at something for once. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right. You always were. I'm sorry. Claire. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Some apologies are best left unanswered, not out of pride but out of preservation. Because sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a choice to stop bleeding. Months later, I was back at work, designing a new campaign for a charity my father had partnered with. He'd started showing up at my office sometimes, not to check on me, but to bring me coffee or ask my opinion or just sit quietly while I worked. It was awkward at first, then slowly it wasn't. One afternoon as he was leaving, he turned back and said, "You know your sister used to be my mirror, but now I see you were always my reflection." I didn't know what to say. He smiled faintly, then walked out. That night I cried not out of sadness, but because for the first time I felt seen. Looking back, I think the $200,000 was never really about money. It was about value, how much we think we're worth, how much we let others define that worth for us. My sister thought money could fix everything. My father thought control could protect him from loss. I thought being right would save me. But in the end, none of those things did. What saved me was learning to stand still even when everyone else was pointing fingers, and trust that the truth would find its own way to the surface. Because the truth always does. It might arrive late. It might crawl instead of run, but it never stays buried forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional, real-life inspired stories. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do, only to watch the truth come back years later?